Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. With chaos raging across the Middle East, Israel has, with no little effort, succeeded to preserve itself from becoming yet another victim to the various conflicts raging around its territory. The Jewish state has elevated its efforts in establishing coordinated mechanisms with its various actors operating adjacent to its borders, with various threats leading to significant defensive measures. To discuss these preemptive efforts and Israel's readiness, I'm joined here in the studio by Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, who is a project director on Middle East development at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Professor Hillel Frisch, who is a Middle East expert at Begin-Sadat Center at Bar-Ilan University. Welcome.
Hi.
Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding of what is Israel currently undergoing in order to preempt the various challenges.
Well, strategically, the Israeli Defense Forces, as their name reflects, are a defensive mechanism. Israel is a status quo power. It wants to preserve the situation as it is, its borders, its sovereignty, and it has no ambitions across its borders. This is strategically the defense. But doctrinally, it has always been very offensive. It didn't want to wait for others to attack its population centers, its mobilization processes, because it is built on 3/4 of its military. The ground forces are in the reserves, and therefore it used to preempt, to try and strike the first blow. Now, when it is between wars, it is undertaking some such operations, most of them undercover. There is no declaration either from Israel or from the attacked side for various reasons, and it is building fences and walls around it in order to forestall any penetration above the ground or under it. Such penetrations would obviously cause Israel to escalate and go into another country or region territory, which it doesn't want to. So this is an effort which is ongoing, and it seems to be quite successful.
Well, I'd like to ask you, General Kuperwasser, when we're talking about the challenges Israel faces, one of the challenges is, of course, the smuggling of weapons, as well as other aspects of attack tunnels and penetration from hostile territories, whether it be the Wilayat Sinai, who is declared from the Sinai Peninsula that it wants to attack the Jewish state on several occasions, the Sinai branch of the Islamic State, as well as Hamas, of course, in the Gaza Strip and other organizations and countries in the region. Do you believe that Israel is strategically prepared in order to face those challenges, and how does it establish the efforts in the mechanism in order to make sure of that?
Basically, and following what Amir was just said, I think that the main challenge we have in our effort to be prepared is the challenge of fast learning. That's the most important issue, because the situation is changing rapidly. The entire situation in the Middle East is so different than the one that the forces were built for originally. So they have to go through many changes. And the faster you learn, you understand the changes, the faster you make the necessary adjustments, and sometimes these are revolutions, not minor adjustments, the more prepared you are to face the new challenges. Now, basically, originally, the army was built in order to face standing forces, standing armies of the states around us. Today, this is more or less irrelevant. And what we have to face is how you deal with organizations that control territory, sometimes with the accountability that comes with it, like Hamas in Gaza, and sometimes without it. And how do you prepare yourself to face the tools they use, which are very different to the divisions and other formats of power that we used to face in the past? So what you see here, I think that, and this, by the way, this fast learning is necessary because the other side is also learning very fast. So we are in an ongoing battle of fast learning, who learns faster. And what you see today is that we have developed all kinds of ideas that our enemies never thought that we should be able to develop. And we put them in a very difficult position. How do you overcome the steps Israel takes? For example, this just simple relatively simple idea of building a wall along the border with Gaza. And the entire idea of Hamas in their learning was that, okay, we have a problem with the rockets, we'll go underground. Now it turns out that this too is not that easy, and Israel has the resources that enable it to confront this kind of threat. So it's we should have to see what is the next move of Hamas, where they're going, and we have to think about it right now in order to develop an answer in advance for the next step. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the rockets of Hezbollah. So we have developed this very advanced active defense systems in order to confront the threat coming from Hezbollah. So yes, Nasrallah threatens very loudly that he's going to do this and that, but he knows that it's going to be much more difficult than he thought once something starts. And on the other hand, he has not developed the same kind of defense that would prevent Israel from hitting him. So on all these levels, we are fast learning and we are making the necessary adjustments together with the Americans. I must say, without the American help, we were not be able to develop and to purchase the weapons we need and the tools we need in order to be on the line necessary to confront these challenges. That's where we are today. And we have to keep being innovative and creative all the time. We cannot sit on the laurels for 1 second.
And we'll focus on that during this program. Professor Frisch, how do you perceive it currently? Of course, Israel has still remained a villa within the jungle, if I may quote the former IDF Chief of Staff, Ehud Barak. But at the same time, Israel has made, as we hear from General Kuperwasser, the necessary adjustments as it continues to learn from the dynamics of this region, that it continues to develop and change when it comes to weaponry, when it comes to means, and how it actually has to conduct its warfare.
Well, with all the flux, there are still a number of constants. One constant is that basically you have to have offensive capabilities to achieve deterrence. And deterrence gives you a time span of peace to develop demographically, economically, technologically, and spiritually, and in every way. So Israel's offensive capabilities is what maintains deterrence. If Hamas didn't think that, and Hezbollah didn't think that if their attack would be answered with tremendous pain, a tremendous attack on our side, and tremendous infliction of pain on them, they would be bothering us all the time. So that deterrence is only achieved by offensive capabilities. So we have to keep on developing offensive capabilities. But the mix between offensive and defensive has really changed, and I think for reasons that were discussed here, basically our enemies are less threatening than the enemies we used to have in the 50s and 60s, and that allows us to develop defensive mechanisms that come into play when deterrence fails. And that's very, very important, because deterrence will always fail. We always have to assume that at a certain point in time, deterrence will fail, and then defensive measures are very important.
Mr. Oren?
Some developments in the improvement of the Israeli combat capability are internal. They don't really have a lot to do with what is happening on the other side. For instance, when Israel left Lebanon in the year 2000, some in the Palestinian camp saw it as a prelude to doing almost the same in the West Bank and Gaza and pushing Israel out of the territories. And I'm not referring now to Ariel Sharon's later disengagement from Gaza. They wanted to do it under threat of force or force itself. Now, they failed, but they did manage to distract the attention of the Israeli Defense Forces, and the Israeli Defense Forces were not fully prepared for what happened in Lebanon in 2006 as a result. But for the last 11 years, there has not been such a distraction, and especially for the last 3 years, ever since the last time around in Gaza, exactly 3 years ago, the Israeli Defense Forces have enjoyed, first, a stable defense budget and a multi-year plan and a lot of training. And this is one measure for the combat capability of an army. So the enemies around Israel know, when they analyze professionally ideology aside, but professionally, when they analyze the ability of the Israeli Defense Forces to fight today, either in Lebanon against Hezbollah or in Gaza against Hamas, they know that the IDF is probably going to be much better than it was 3, 8, 11 years ago, while they, as General Kuperwasser mentioned, they have not improved as much.
General Kuperwasser, of course, being also in your past history, you were the head of the research division of the Israeli intelligence of the IDF, which, of course, is a key ingredient in being able to prepare a country defensively as well as offensively. Do you believe that the cooperation Israel is establishing on the intelligence side with various countries, of course, it was made public that Israel is cooperating with Egypt and with Jordan in order to maintain regional stability to a certain extent. Do you believe that this is a key essence in safeguarding Israel?
Of course. It's not only the intelligence cooperation, but in the security cooperation that we have with our friends, the intelligence component is extremely important. And since we are fighting the same enemies, we have to help each other. There's no other way to get the necessary results without this cooperation. So when and in today's Middle East, we are friends of the entire pragmatic camp, so to say, or pragmatic elements. And we have to help those pragmatic elements. They are fighting radicals who are interested in toppling them and in annihilating us. So we have to be very cautious not to let these radicals have the upper hand and to cooperate with the radicals and with the pragmatists fighting the radicals. And when it happens in Egypt, fighting the radicals in Sinai, it's one element of that. In Syria, it's extremely important to be able to somehow contain the gains of radicals like the Iranians and their friends over there. We are, and of course, Iran is the main threat that everybody is trying to work against. Look, when we look backwards, for example, to where the Iranians are today in their nuclear program, the intelligence cooperation was key in holding the Iranians from having a nuclear weapon. They could have had a nuclear weapon long ago. So it's we have a very important achievement in this respect. At the same time, coming back to what was said here, we have improved considerably in the way we cope with some of the threats, as I mentioned before. But there are other threats that are still very problematic, and we haven't found a real answer to. For example, the terror inside. We are in a better position than where we were before, but we still suffer from the problem, and we don't have good enough answers, and we have to improve ourselves, both from the intelligence point of view and from an operational point of view. And on the Iranian issue, we also haven't found yet a way to contain Iran in the region. So they are still gaining strength in the region, and they are, as you know, Rouhani just said it today, that if they are faced with new sanctions, they are going to move away, to leave the agreement and the nuclear agreement, and they are going to be in a better position than they were before the signing of the agreement, which tells you that they did some progress on their nuclear issue during those last 2 years of the program, of the agreement. So it's there are some things that are still very challenging for Israel's security, and we have to find a way to cope with them as well.
Professor Frisch, General Kuperwasser earlier stated that the key ingredient, or one of the main elements for Israel to be able to defend itself, is the American cooperation and the American investment also in safeguarding the security of Israel by, of course, signing a memorandum of understanding of some $40 billion over the course of 10 years. Do you believe that this cooperation with the United States, and as well as with other countries in a smaller format, is a key element in order to establish some kind of a front in identifying the various challenges and being able to combat them?
Certainly. I mean, the United States is on the cutting edge of almost any military technology. It's not only a question of finance, it's also a question of working with working with the United States. In fact, I think that the finance is the minor side of the equation. Israel could do it alone. I mean, it would have to increase taxes, but it's not. It doesn't involve amounts that the Israeli public couldn't cope with. It's actually the tie-in to American technology and to American know-how that's really critical in maintaining Israel's technological edge. But it's very important to point out that it's a symbiotic relationship. I mean, the United States also gains from cooperation with Israel.
Some components of national power in general and national military power in particular are unquantifiable, such as morale and motivation and consensus, and others that professionals analyze have almost nothing to do with the number of fighter planes or armored divisions, but rather with the processes, the command and control. For instance, the outgoing commanding general of the Israeli Air Force, General Amir, improved the ability of the Air Force to hit its targets because he has opened the bottlenecks in the planning and production, because it's a factory, it's a target factory. And if you have the right processes and you can hit a moving target or a time-critical target, then the campaign is going to be shortened. And if you do it right, before your population is being hit, or before Ben Gurion Airport is going to be hit by a rocket, you have achieved your goals in the campaign. So these are the ingredients which really count, and it seems that Israel has improved a lot over the last few years in these domains.
One of the aspects that, if we're talking about the Air Force general who was replaced, new incoming general has stated that neither Hezbollah nor the other enemies of Israel have any understanding of the capabilities and are going to be very surprised in the next confrontation with Israel. How much of a deterrent does currently Israel have in the face of the various challenges, General Kuperwasser?
I think vis-a-vis Hezbollah, we have a very strong deterrence, because even if they don't understand exactly what they should expect, they know that Israel can hit them very hard. And more than that, they know that if their attempt to present themselves as the defenders and the shield of Lebanon is not going to work, and, especially now that they are so much integrated into the Lebanese establishment. So they understand that this is not going to work, and they are not looking for an opportunity to put Israel to a test in this respect. That said, we have to remember that they have, as I said before, it's in this process of learning. What are their conclusions of that? Their conclusion is that the next war should be fought both from Lebanon and from Syria. And what they want to do is to turn Syria into another area from which you can fight, because under Assad, in the good old days, they couldn't fight from Syria. Assad would rather have them fight from Lebanon. Today, they are actually taking over Syria, and they are turning Syria into a place where they can fight from. And this is where you see the efforts of the Iranians to build all kinds of bases in Syria, both naval and other bases in Syria, bases that can be used for launching terror attacks. And I would not be surprised at all if they would use it not only against Israel, but also against the Jordanians. Jordanians are extremely worried because it's a strategic issue here. It's whether Jordan can continue to be a part of Israel's, besides of their own, but also of Israel's defense belt. And it's another way of weakening Israel. So what we see here is a strategic issue, and I'm also worried, by the way, in this respect, from the possibility that they would use Syria as a base from which they can develop further their nuclear capabilities, because there's no monitoring in Syria, and because there are such huge loops in the huge holes in the agreement with Iran and the nuclear issues, that they can actually take some of their scientists and move them to Syria. And just like the North Koreans did all kinds of things in Syria in the past, they can do it today there, and nobody's going to follow what they're doing. That's this new idea of turning Syria into the new area from which you can fight Israel. Strategically speaking, in my mind, this is what we are seeing right now. And in this respect, by the way, we have to be very cautious looking at what's happening in North Korea. Because you see, for example, the capability of North Korea today to launch missiles to a very long range is coming from the fact that they were getting probably very heavy, very capable engines from former Soviet Union factories, probably Ukrainians. And if this has happened there, there's no reason to believe that it cannot happen with the Iranians. So we are looking here at all kinds of ways in which these people who keep thinking all the time how they can outsmart Israel can come up with all kinds of ideas, and we have to be very much on alert all the time.
And another angle to what you just said, Professor Frisch, a meeting took place in Beirut between Hamas official and an Iranian official, two senior officials who were very keen of publicizing the renewed cooperation between Iran and the Islamist organization in the Gaza Strip. There seems to be some kind of organized mechanism in which Hamas would reassure the Iranians that at the time that Hezbollah and Iran go to war against Israel, Hamas would also join forces and attack Israel from the south. How much of a viability is this reality?
We have to realize that it never occurred. It never occurred. In 2006, when Hezbollah fought, and it fought for 30 days against Israelis, I think 33 days, the Hamas never participated, and in the 3 rounds that have occurred between Hamas and Israel, Hezbollah has never joined forces with Hamas against Israel. I think that it's really highly unlikely that cooperation will reach that level where there'll be synchronic operations against Israel, simply because the Gaza population is really against any further round, and it's a very, and the Hamas live within the population, and they feel this swell of anti-Hamas sentiment, and they can't go it alone. I'd also like to point out that Hezbollah is also pretty weak because I analyzed the sites, the Hezbollah sites. They almost hide the fact that they're fighting in Syria. For instance, I looked at the sites over half a year. They didn't have one in-house report about our soldiers fighting in Syria, as you often have in patriotic kind of writing, where you focus on a unit and you show how patriotically they're fighting for our cause. It means that it's embarrassing. Most Shiites in Lebanon do not want that conflict because they don't want that conflict because they want to maintain good relationships with the Sunni population because they want to avoid the civil war that they came out of after 15 years between 1975 and 1990. So after all that bloodletting in Syria, they'll be very reluctant to participate in a war against Israel. That's good news.
Mr. Oren, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. Give us a little bit of an understanding on both aspects. Do you believe that Syria could become a hub for the various developments that General Kuperwasser is pointing out to, as well as the various cooperations that might ensue in a possible confrontation?
Well, General Kuperwasser said that no one is monitoring the vast expanses of Syria, the deserts around Deir ez-Zor, but obviously General Kuperwasser's old colleagues at military intelligence and Mossad and other agencies are trying to find out what is happening there. The last time around, exactly 10 years ago, both the Israeli intelligence community as well as the American one managed to cooperate and find the Syrian work and the North Korean work. It doesn't mean that they will always be successful, but obviously they are keeping an eye. As to your question to Professor Frisch about the contact between Iran and Hamas, rather than show the success of Iran, it shows the weakness of Hamas, because the same Hamas official, Aruri, was ejected. One is ejected from Turkey, and another one is ejected from Qatar, and they have almost nowhere to go. So they are now talking about renewing the cooperation. But the basic interests have not changed. If Hamas is able to act according to Iran's guidance, it will. But it is operating under the watchful eye of the Sisi regime. And another point is that we are all talking in generalities. There are personalities involved. And when one gets to know the current crop of Israeli military leadership, people who were at General Kuperwasser rank or lower when he was on active duty, like General Eisenkot, the chief of staff, or the incoming General Norkin of the Air Force, or General Zamir of Southern Command, who is in charge both of the wall and of the offensive operations planned, one sees that they are not arrogant, they are not issuing empty threats, they are not trigger happy, but they will be very capable if they are asked to execute their plans. So on the other side, they will do well to hear what they are saying, because they are whispering, they are not shouting.
Nevertheless, one of the things that are a key ingredient of all those countries and organizations, they have on their bottom charter the aspiration of destroying Israel. Do you believe that the hate for Israel will be able to unify Hezbollah and Hamas to a certain degree of operational capabilities or movements in order to bring about a conflagration that Israel, as Professor Frisch has stated, hasn't seen before?
Yes, of course. First of all, they cooperate for a long time. It's true what Professor Frisch said, that they didn't operate simultaneously, but they cooperate all the time, sharing knowledge, thinking together. This fast learning issue, they understand that if they think together, they can learn faster. And that's very dangerous by itself. And they can also cooperate in the future, because this hate for denial of Israel's right to exist, not only hate, is combining them together, and not only them. And we have to understand that in this world that we are living in, the one thing that differentiates between the ultra radicals and the realistic radicals of the Middle East is that they don't always agree about whether they should carry out terror attacks against the West at this point of time. But all of them agree that they should cooperate in carrying out terror attacks and fighting against the existence of Israel. And that's why we have to look at all radicals as a danger for us.
Well, we're coming to the end of the program. Last sentence.
One common error, extrapolating from the tactical to the strategic. There are suicide bombers. We haven't seen suicide regimes or nations. They are not going to commit suicide by trying to destroy Israel.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank General Kuperwasser, Mr. Oren, and Professor Frisch for coming here today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.